right, we can probably go ahead and get started. So I'll introduce myself. This is Joe Garfunkel. I'm the chapter leader for our Citizens Climate Lobby Houston chapter. And this is our monthly meeting. And we're so glad and fortunate to have Luke Orlando with us today. Luke is a councilman from one of our Houston suburbs out in Pearland. And Luke is going to be talking on a conservative perspective on climate change. And so to help us out with that discussion, we'll have Courtly and Judith Hyatt as our moderators. So yeah, why don't we just jump in and get started?
All right, good morning. Thanks again, Councilman, for joining our discussion. Are you comfortable with us recording this?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate that. So audience members, you can please put any questions you have in the chat and we'll get to them towards the end. And just to make sure, Luke, are you going to be able to be with us for 30 minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. However long you need.
Okay, thank you. Great. We appreciate you being with CCL Houston today, and thank you for your past meetings with Pearland Youth Movement and your efforts to advance the environmental stewardship resolution in the Texas legislature. Do you want to take a few minutes to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Luke Orlando. As was mentioned, I'm on the Pearland City Council. I got elected in 2019 and became the youngest ever member of the Pearland City Council by about 10 years or so. So definitely proud of that. I grew up in Pearland. I went to Manville High School down on Highway 6, and after that went to the University of Texas at Austin. And then came back. I do management consulting professionally in addition to city council, and have always just had a sense that if we had the right people in government, that it could really be an instrument for making people's lives better. And so certainly as a younger person, I have been more aware of and feel more concerned with the impacts of climate change, and would like to see it become a nonpartisan issue that we can all address regardless of ideology. So really appreciate you guys having me here this morning, and excited for the conversation, and happy to answer whatever questions you guys have.
Great, thank you. So I'll go ahead and start off with questions, and then whenever Judith comes in, she can ask her questions. So Citizens Climate Lobby is dedicated to pursuing carbon dividend legislation. This policy would place a fee on greenhouse gas emissions, then return funds raised from the fee directly back to the American people in the form of a monthly dividend. This revenue-neutral, market-based approach has widespread support from Republican economists and current and former Republican elected officials like Mitt Romney and Bob Inglis. What are your thoughts on carbon dividend legislation? And would you be willing to endorse or issue a statement of support for such a policy?
Yeah, so I'm pretty familiar with this legislation. I'm a big fan of Bob Inglis and have a great relationship with him and Republican. So I think that this type of policy addresses a lot of can make a big impact towards climate change, while also being fundamentally, from my perspective, fundamentally conservative in a lot of respects, and addressing a lot of what conservatives care about. First of all, what you mentioned, being revenue neutral, that this isn't going to be this huge item that can then fund a bunch of other spending. This isn't some cash grab from the federal government to pay for other priorities, that this would truly be about shifting incentives. And then also what we've all seen in the last couple months, sending people a check in the mail is pretty popular, regardless of who you vote for president. People kind of like that. So I think that is a really key part as well. And correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but I think another portion of this proposal, or at least the one that I've talked about and worked on with Bob, is that it's also border adjustable. And so the US doesn't impose this fee on ourselves and then put ourselves at a competitive disadvantage, because we're going to be applying a commensurate tax on all imports from countries that don't have the same kind of thing. So in terms of what conservatives care about, I think that's huge. I think that's something I hear a lot when I'm meeting with people, is that, well, why should America do all this? And, especially China, India, these places that are very populous and that are going to continue to use more energy, they're not going to have any commitment or any skin in the game. So no, I think there are obviously is something as big and complicated and potentially transformative as this, there's going to be a lot of details to work out, but I'm supportive of the principles behind this, and happy to say so, and to work towards solutions where we can get these principles actually passed.
Great, thank you. So the next question is, what are some key points, occurrences, otherwise, that have guided your acknowledgement and concern of climate change?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say there's really kind of three things that were all kind of like different phases of me, getting involved in this. And I would say the first thing, just kind of, I've been involved in Republican politics for a long time, which probably not a lot of 26-year-olds can say, but I went to the 2008 Republican National Convention. So I've been, as a 14-year-old, and so I've been kind of steeped in this for a long time. And so I had a general disposition at some point of the thing that I felt was most compelling was, the climate is something that is always changing. It's been much hotter and much colder than it is right now at various points. And maybe most key, we've had multiple ice ages, and we've emerged from we've emerged from all of them, and it wasn't because there were cavemen driving SUVs. And so that was like a compelling thing to me at that time. And then I saw this chart, and it might even be more like a comic, but it's very long, and it shows like tens of thousands of years of human history and what we think the average temperature was. And it's these slow, like just small, like very gradual curves over time. And you can see, like, yeah, the climate changes, it goes back and forth, but it takes place over these very extended periods. And then you get to the very end of the graph where we're at right now, and it's just this rapid spike just directly up. And it's like, oh, wow. So when we're talking about, yeah, the climate's always changed, it's always changed, never like this, never like this at all, at this scale, at this pace. And seeing that for the first time just made me realize that, like, that talking point that really, I don't know, convinced me, wasn't really that convincing when you look at the actual how that looks on a line graph. So that was kind of the first thing, just in terms of, okay, this is real and serious, and different. And then I guess probably the second thing, and I think a lot of people, this is their path, is just our extreme weather events. I think a lot of people notice it, and of course we can't attribute any one event to, well, this like Hurricane Harvey, this one thing was because of climate change. But when you have 3 500-year storms in 3 years, you can start feeling pretty certain that you've changed the underlying characteristics of the climate that's producing these weather events, and that you really need to do something about it, or we're going to continue to have events like this. And so that was kind of the second thing. And then I think the third thing has been more recent. It's been since I've been on the Pearland City Council and have been becoming more knowledgeable about these issues, and really just saying to myself, like, hey, how can I impact this? And I think there's this sense that it's just going to be so hard to do this, that it's going to it's going to be almost impossible, that we need like all these miracle technologies. And just in my reading and research lately, I'm like, we don't really need a miracle. We need two things. We need to electrify almost everything. And then we need to make sure that the way we're generating that electricity is through non-carbon sources. And the technology that we have right now with renewables, with nuclear, the cost of solar and wind energy is getting so inexpensive now, to where it really makes sense. Like, we can do this with the technology we have right now. And that's been kind of the next phase, I guess, in my desire to get changes done here. Like, this isn't a we don't need a miracle technology. We don't need this moonshot thing to happen for us to be able to solve this. Like, we can solve this right now.
What talking points do you hit when addressing climate change and solutions for this crisis with fellow Republicans? And how would you approach other Republicans who have reservations about being the first to take the lead on the climate-related processes?
Yeah, that can be difficult for sure. And I've had a lot of these conversations. I think it really comes down to kind of three things. The first one is just like respecting people and meeting them where they're at. And so I wrote an op-ed in February of this year, and one of the big things that I was calling on Republicans to do is to engage with young people, engage with people of color, engage with people who they had not been traditionally seen or recently seen as engaging with. And my thing has always been, if people don't think you care about them, they don't really care what the next word out of your mouth is, like what your policy prescriptions are, if they don't think that you care about them and people like them. And so I think that goes for this case too. I think it's really easy to be like, hey, the data is so clear, and to be frustrated and to be dismissive or condescending. And you have to fight that impulse, I think, is one. And then the other thing is, there's been like caring about people like them, like people who live in more rural areas, people whose lives are dependent on fossil fuels at this point for their livelihoods. I've seen some estimates that if you're looking at both direct and kind of indirect components of this, maybe 40% of the Texas economy still in 2021 is oil and gas, or directly downstream of oil and gas. And so if somebody just feels like you want to obliterate their job and you're not concerned about what that means for them and their families, they're not going to take the next policy prescription that you have seriously. I think we kind of saw this, and I don't remember the exact quote, but in 2016, it was the widespread thing, like, oh, Hillary Clinton said, we're going to put coal plants out of business. And of course, like, that's the punchy headline. There's a lot more to it, and retraining and whatever. But when you just hear like, oh yeah, like, screw people who work on the oil fields or in coal plants, it's hard to win people over that way. And it's also not just a political thing. I mean, we're going to need the expertise of the energy industry. We're going to need people who are just, in terms of the people able to like physically develop that infrastructure, and in terms of just the energy knowledge. So let's make it easier for both companies and for people to get on board and say, hey, this isn't a punitive thing. This is something that is ultimately going to increase opportunities for everyone. I think that's one. The second is just kind of like speaking the language of conservatives. And I think that goes to what we talked about initially with the fee and dividend approach. This is something like China is going to be accountable to. This is something Europe is going to be held accountable to as well. I think that's important. It's going to be revenue neutral. Those are key features. And then maybe the biggest thing, and this is something I've gotten really big on just recently in a lot of my research, I think the environmental movement has to paint a picture of a better future in a way that it hasn't traditionally done. I think a lot of environmentalism right now comes out of the 1970s energy crisis, and it's just like conserve, 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 and just be more efficient and sacrifice. There's a quote I like from someone I've been reading a lot lately, Saul Griffith, who has MacArthur grant and has been a leading voice on decarbonization. But it's like he characterizes the modern way we try to sell this as like, if we try really, really hard and we sacrifice nearly everything, then we can have a future that sucks slightly less than it would have otherwise. And that just doesn't sell people. And so I guess where I'm at is like, efficiency is really good. We don't want to waste energy. It's just, I mean, it's not moral just to waste things, but that's not going to get us there. If we're using, you know, half as much power, but it's still being powered by coal plants, that's not going to get us there. And the other thing is, we don't really have to. We can get to a point, I guess this is the point I was making earlier, we can scale up these clean energy technologies in a way that we don't have to all drive, you know, drive very tiny cars and live in much smaller houses and never travel and dramatically scale back our energy consumption. We are in this incredible place where we can have affordable, clean energy. And so I think there's this message that we sell there first, that, and then second of all, what does that look like? In Australia, where they're largely there for home electricity, for instance, that looks like $1,500 to $2,500 more in the average family's pocket just on saved energy costs. Because when we've electrified everything, it's much more efficient. It's much cheaper. If you have a solar panel on your house, you don't have to pay the transmission cost of getting it there. So you save money. There's obviously huge health impacts of not burning fossil fuels and putting that into the air, putting that into your home. And just in general, people can live cleaner, happier, healthier lives that save them money. I mean, that's like a way better message, and a message that got me more fired up of like, oh, this isn't just something we have to do. This isn't just eating your vegetables so that, you know, you don't have these terrible health outcomes for our planet later on. This is something that's actually really exciting. It's going to create millions of new jobs, well-paying jobs, and it's going to have all these positive benefits for us. But like, let's sell it like that instead of this almost moralism of you know, everybody just needs to, you know, stop eating meat and you know, not fly and all this other stuff. Like, let's get the big picture stuff right. And then we don't have to just make these small energy reductions because our energy is going to be coming from clean sources. So sorry, yeah, a lot of different points. And I think that last one is going to be just as important for motivating not only conservatives and Republicans, but you know, everybody who's not already there like we are on this issue. Like it has to be a better sell.
Thank you. So another question we have is, as they relate to climate change and environmental stewardship, what are some initiative conversations you plan to start or take the lead on while in your city council seat?
Yes. So again, this is I have a full-time job and then come and do the city council stuff. So it's tough to come up with the frameworks for some of this. And I would say here, I'm super grateful for John at CCL and for the Pearland Youth Movement, who, when we met, they gave me some incredible resources. One of which was a plan just recently put out by Plano. It's the clean air and emissions reduction plan, just came out a few months ago. That's been really key. And so I think we need a comprehensive approach like that in Pearland, and that's something I've been working on with our city staff. But really, it ultimately is going to come down to two things, and that's how are our current city rules preventing people from A, electrifying, and B, getting that electricity from those clean sources. And so what are the barriers that are in place in our electric code? What are our barriers that make it harder for someone to put a solar panel on their house, for instance? I think those are going to be really the key things. And then, like I was talking about earlier, getting the big picture things right. I mean, where we use most of our energy, it's how are you powering your home? How are you powering your vehicles? I mean, those are the two biggest things. And so making it easy for people to make that decision, and then making the city both a leader and making the city a leader in that as well. And so I think that largely looks like putting the framework in place to transition to an electric city vehicle fleet, and then to increasingly getting our city energy from renewable sources. So that's both putting solar panels on rooftops at all of our city facilities, and that's also when our electric contract comes up, making sure that our retail electric provider is giving us a plan that's 100% renewable.
Thank you for that. Who in the business and political communities in Houston and Texas would you suggest that we talk to build support and coalition for passage of state and federal climate legislation?
Yeah, I would say in terms of doing that on the Republican side, I think looking towards younger Republican elected officials and groups is really a great starting point. And we have a good number of those in Brazoria County, where I am, that I'm, don't want to put them on the spot too publicly here, but happy to share those names offline. But I think that's kind of the first place to start. In terms of the business community, as I'm sure you are all aware, it seems like this approach that we're on board with here is having a moment right now nationally, and we just had the American Petroleum Institute come out and say having a carbon fee would be the best way to go about doing this. And so I think that business is coming along. When you have even kind of the oil industry coming along, I think you've built a policy that is sensible and can work and can build a coalition politically. So yeah, in terms of the political side, happy to share those contacts. And on the business side, I think you're seeing that coalition emerge and that space being created for even those who produce fossil fuels to get on board with being a part of the solution.
Thank you. So can you address the generational gap within the Republican Party when it comes to views on climate change?
It's huge, and it gives me a lot of hope for sure, because you look at some of the polling that doesn't break out by age, and it can be a little bit discouraging. But you look at it disaggregated by age, and it's like of young Republicans. So depending how they do that, sometimes under 35, sometimes under 40. By a 2-to-1 margin, young Republicans say that we're not doing enough to address climate change, and they'd like more action from the government on climate change. Nearly 80%, like 4 out of 5 young Republicans, say that when we're developing new energy, we need to be prioritizing renewables over fossil fuels. And then I think probably most importantly, 3 out of 4 young Republicans say they're more willing to vote for and support a candidate that believes in climate change and wants to do something about it. And so as we see the influence of millennial voters and Gen Z voters increasing, I think especially at the Republican primary levels where this change has to happen, of you have 2 candidates, they're both conservatives, and one takes that to mean we should conserve the resources that we have on this planet and protect that for future generations and do something about climate change. And the other one says, I don't have a desire to do that. And that first candidate wins and gets to shape the future of the party. So I think as younger people get more plugged in and continue to represent a larger part of the electorate, I'm hopeful that we can get a lot closer towards making these solutions bipartisan.
So on a more personal level, what are some of the ways that you reduce your carbon footprint and maybe encourage your colleagues to reduce their carbon footprint?
For sure. Yeah, I'm sounding like a broken record on these, but I think it's, so the biggest thing, it's like, how do I power my home? I pay a little extra for a plan that it uses renewables. I think the goal for all of us should be renewables actually are now getting cheaper than fossil fuels. So let's take away the impediments that continues to make it more expensive. But that's kind of the biggest thing is that. And I would like for my next vehicle to be an electric one. And so I really think that those are the two big things. If you get those two things right, you know, the other stuff, having a conservationist ethic on the other stuff matters, but if you get those two things right, you're most of the way there.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate how you mentioned like you're driven to break down kind of like the financial barrier to get to some of these solutions and talking to your parent constituents about like how you address the challenges that to help you get to be more sustainable. Appreciate that feedback. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So I'm checking the chat. Do you feel like you can help Pearland get to a climate plan?
Yeah, I think that every city is going to have to look at what are we doing to what are we doing to make sure both as a city and the people in our city, sorry, like the city government and the people in our city are able to get cheap, clean energy as easily as possible. I think that's going to be an initiative that everyone is trying to do. So to the extent that we can say, you know, where is the government in the way of doing that? And where is the government not setting a good example there? I think, yeah, absolutely. We need to put some processes in place around that. And kind of a positive thing on this note, obviously we've been talking a lot recently about the freeze and all of the implications that has had for people in our city. And the person sitting up on one of the older gentlemen on the city council, probably the one you would least expect would want to do something about climate change, said, you know, we keep having these things happen. These things are happening, and we need to start thinking at some point, what are we doing to be more resilient? And I jumped on that immediately and said, you know, hey, I'm happy to help put a plan together around that. If we want to look at our city codes and what we're doing to increase environmental resiliency and put the right incentives in place, let's do that. And so I think a lot of this is framing it as how are we able to better weather the stuff that the weather that has been coming our way, and how do we prevent those kind of events from happening.
What is your advice on how to approach conservative legislators to ask for their support for carbon fee and dividend?
That was my question. I think he kind of answered that earlier.
Okay, all right.
Well, if you got any additional comments, I'd love to hear them, but I think you did I liked your comments a lot in terms of how to approach conservatives, but if you got anything additional to add to that, yeah, that'd be great.
Sure. I mean, two quick things, I guess, or I would add. Yeah, this ultimately, I just want to change the frame on this from this is not, we're doing this really expensive thing that's going to be really hard and painful because we want to protect the environment. It's in protecting the environment, we're going to end up saving money and have all these other positive impacts. So I think it's really that is like part of the thing. Like for Pearland, if we put these solar panels on our roofs, there's an initial upfront investment, which we're about to get a lot of money from the federal government from the recent Recovery Act. And so I think we can look to using that for some of these investments, but you do the one-time investment and then it's a permanent savings in terms of lower energy costs. So I think that's part of it is, hey, we're saving money. This is a fiscally conservative thing to do. And second, if you don't buy this, if you don't buy the science of climate change and you don't think this is a big issue, your voters do. The people who are coming up in your party do believe that. And so even if this is not an issue that it is something that's important to you, it's going to become politically increasingly difficult not to get on board here. So I think that's kind of the next thing. If you don't want to engage in this because you think it's good policy, it's good politics, or it's increasingly going to be good politics, even on the Republican side, and you have to adapt to survive. So.
Thank you.
So another one, any thoughts on bridging the gap between younger conservatives and older conservatives on the climate change issue?
Yeah, on that, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, I think it gets to abstract the climate change discussion. It really resonates with people, and this is when I said, it increased the salience of the issue to me, is like, this isn't about, 20 years from now, what's going to happen around the world and it's going to change these climate phenomenon. This is about you spending, 2 of the last 3 years gutting drywall in your home and taking out your neighbor's carpet and not having power for a week. Like we're experiencing climate change now. Like this thing we call climate change is now, and it's impacting your life right now. And so I think that's kind of the biggest thing is it's not this abstraction. It's this. This is a real thing that is impacting you, and you can call it whatever you want, but if we don't do something about it, it's going to continue to get worse and worse, and it's not sustainable. So I think it's really that. And then another thing is, I've seen you, if you don't say the phrase climate change, you probably pick up another 20% of people when you're just talking about the merits of the issues. Like, hey, do you want a lower electric bill and clean air and clean water? That's pretty appealing, again, regardless of where you find yourself on the political divide.
Right, thank you. What, in addition to endorsing our legislation, would you be interested in lobbying with us? So we do lobby days with congressional leaders I think we're shooting for 4 times a year now, if not more. What's your feelings about that? Because we really value your perspective, and you to these conversations would be beneficial.
Sure. No, I appreciate that, and certainly, yes, send me the information, and I'm happy to get involved any way I can. So very grateful. It takes a special group of people certainly to get up on a Saturday morning and think, how can we advance the ball on climate change? So and the fact that we do have groups doing that, I mean, that's what creates the momentum and the political pressure and the right political incentives for people in my position, and especially people at the state and federal level to make the right choices here. So tremendously appreciate what you guys do.
So somebody asked, who's your state and federal representative, and do you lobby them on the climate issue?
Yeah, so it is Ed Thompson is my state representative, and I also worked in his office for for a few years when I was up at UT. And then we have State Senator Larry Taylor. And so I think CCL and the Pearland Youth Movement met with Representative Thompson. I also made the introduction with Senator Taylor. I'm not sure that he's gotten back in touch, but yeah, I made that introduction there. And yeah, at the federal level, actually I wrote an op-ed, I guess at the end of last year, praising some efforts that were being done to reduce carbon with increasing forest output. And so, yeah, I've tried to engage kind of anywhere I can, whether that's stuff I can do in Pearland or whether that's giving praise to state and federal members of my party that are doing the right thing, or just making connections between groups like yours and those officials to try to get more on board doing the right thing.
Great, thank you. So I think we have time maybe for one or two more questions. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks. So there's a resident of Pearland on the call with us, and the question is there an effort towards public transportation?
Yes, I know Helen. Good morning, Helen. So we actually just passed our multimodal plan, where that takes a very holistic approach of how are people moving around Pearland, and a huge emphasis of that has been, what are non-car options for doing that. And so we've made huge investments in the last few years in building a fully connected walking trail system around the city. In terms of public transit, there is a component in the multimodal plan that looks to what would future public transit options look like. It's just difficult at the level of density kind of to support that, but certainly when you're looking at the long range picture, I think kind of we need to be looking at all options. So that is something being looked at. We also had a park and ride that didn't take off in a way that it should have. I don't know if, what needed to happen there, but yeah, we're looking at all options to have carbon-free transit and more efficient transit options for sure.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that effort as a city councilman. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Marco, did you want to ask your question?
Sure. The I think you gave a great advice for talking to conservatives earlier. And I was just thinking, the second richest person in the world, sells electric cars. Is you have any advice on how we can better engage with the business community so that we can, put forward the messages that's happening without, carbon fee and dividend. If we do that, it's going to really accelerate the opportunities that we have in front of us for climate change businesses, or businesses that help solve the problem. The world is hungry for solutions. Do you have any advice for how do we better engage with the business community?
Yeah, that's a great point on the world's second richest man thing. And I actually forgot to mention, I'm not sure if you guys saw, but just kind of quietly, there was a massive battery that's been put on the grid, actually in Brazoria County, down a little south of Pearland here in Angleton, that apparently is a Tesla project. And yeah, kind of an example, at least that I've been using amongst people in my party of hey, look, here's the private sector leading on renewable energy, and it makes sense. It's a good business decision. In terms of how to better engage, I think a lot of it, I don't know if I made this point as explicitly, but a lot of this does not come down to just having better facts, right? We've had better facts. We've had the facts on our side this whole time. And I think as we see kind of the reaction to this pandemic, sometimes it's not the facts that are going to convince people. A lot of this becomes issues of identity and culture, and like, who do you feel is looking out for you? So it's not necessarily just, oh, look, like, and I see that when I'm talking to my parents. This isn't like a thing of, oh, let me show you all this data and you're going to rationally come to the right decision. It's making you feel like this isn't some like making a world that's safe for and prosperous for me to grow up in and for your future grandkids to grow up in. Like that's not some left-wing liberal thing. That's something that we all can get behind, and that's something that with your identity you can feel like you can get behind. And so that's kind of the bigger thing. It's not just like we can't beat people over the head with facts and expect that like that's going to get them there. I think a lot of that is the same thing with business. It's like what is a more collaborative approach? It's easy, especially as a politician, like that's one of the easiest targets, right? I mean, like, oh, look at these big oil companies who are getting all these breaks. And I mean, that's such an easy target. And like, you know, yeah, let's go and put them out of business. And like that's, if you're in a certain part of, you know, if you're, you know, frankly, like if you're in a certain faction of the Democratic Party, like that's an electorally fruitful strategy. But I would say it's like, how do we reduce their political opposition? And I think that's by taking a more collaborative approach. And then also, like I said earlier, like we're going to need the expertise of the energy industry. So like, what does that look like? I don't know. I think it's like, how do we help you transition? You want to be an energy company. And I think you see this with a lot of with Exxon and Shell. They see the writing on the wall of where this is going. Like, hey, we're not trying to put you out of business. We want you to be a sustainable company that can continue to sustainably make a profit but we want you to be part of the solution. So how can we change the rhetoric from like we're going to defeat you and overrun you to we're going to work together to make your business model one that's not relying on things that are not renewable. Like let's make this a renewable and sustainable business model. So I really think it's kind of that approach in terms of the mechanics of just getting people on board. I'm not sure, that one might be above my pay grade, but I think you have these institutions, like we were talking about the American Petroleum Institute and these other collaborations. I think that might be a good place to start. Like, hey, who in your membership wants to work more closely on this?
Great answer. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time on a Saturday morning for you to dedicate so much of your time and thoughtful conversation with us. Do you mind if we take a picture?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thank
Everybody
you.
turn on their cameras, as many people as possible.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Okay. 1, 2, 3. All right. Thank y'all very much.
This was a wonderful discussion, Luke. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Well, again, really appreciate you guys, and please don't hesitate to reach out if if you have ideas for what I can be doing in Pearland or just opportunities for me to help with the efforts you guys are a part of. I would love to continue working together in the future.
Thank you.
So great. All right. Talk to you guys soon.